Good morning and welcome to Coffee and Conversation with Dr. Rick Muller, Director, IARPA. Now, please welcome INSA Vice President of Policy, Bishop Garrison.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our program on this very rainy day. Today, we are excited to welcome another one of the community's top leaders. And before we begin, as usual, some housekeeping notes. If you have any questions, and we hope you do, please submit them through the questions box on the right side of your screen. I'll do my best to get to as many of your questions as possible. We are also pleased to welcome members of the press to this call. Please note, this program is on the record and being recorded. Also, in the handout section, this is new, in the handout section, you will find information about our graduate student internship program. We have a number of students registered today, so please take a moment to download the file, and if you are eligible, we hope you'll consider applying. Submissions will be accepted until Monday, October 28th. Lastly, a big thank you to our sponsor, Freedom Technology Solutions Group, for their support of this program. We could not bring this level of thought leadership to you without their help. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Stephen Thompson, Vice President of Strategic Development for Freedom Technology, who will introduce our speaker. Stephen, over to you.
Thank you, Bishop, and thanks to INSA for hosting this morning's discussion. Freedom Technology Solution Group's vision is to lead mission modernization through targeted technical innovation and integration, focused on our core competencies of software development, data management, DevSecOps, cloud transformation, and AI/ML. We partner with the IC and DoD to exploit technology for the benefit of our customers and enabling successful mission outcomes. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. Dr. Rick Muller is the 6th full-time director of the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Activity, or IARPA. In this role, he oversees innovative, high-risk, high-payoff research programs aimed at solving some of the IC's most challenging intelligence gaps and providing our nation with an overwhelming intelligence advantage. Before joining IARPA, Dr. Muller was the Senior Manager of Quantum and Advanced Microsystems at Sandia National Laboratories, where he led the Quantum Information Science Program. He also served as Director of the Department of Energy's Quantum Systems Accelerator, one of 5 centers established under the National Quantum Initiative. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rick Muller.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Muller. Thank you, Stephen, for that amazing intro. Dr. Muller, thank you so much again for joining us. And we know we just had you at the summit. It was wonderful to have you on the big stage. Thank you again for joining us here today. So right off the bat, while we were in the virtual green room, we were discussing this. Can you just give us a rundown? What exactly is IARPA as an organization, and what is your mission? What is it that you do?
So IARPA is one of the ARPA organizations, and the first ARPA was DARPA, which was started in response to the Sputnik event decades ago. And DARPA has been an incredibly innovative way of developing research and technology capabilities for the Department of Defense. And so they've got very famous things like the internet that we're using right now. So after 9/11, one of the things that the intelligence community did was they realized they wanted to get the same type of high risk, high consequence research development specifically focused on the intelligence community itself. And that was where IARPA started. We are a very different organization than DARPA. DARPA has a vast scope. I mean, Department of Defense does pretty much everything. And so ours is much more focused around intelligence community problems. And that's wonderful because we get to dig deep and we get to develop relationships with the intelligence community, understand where their needs are, and understand what technical solutions will impact those needs. One of the things that surprises people about IARPA is that, given the fact that we work with the intelligence community, the majority of the work IARPA does is in the open. We want to gather the best ideas out there. We want to understand what the most important developments going on currently are. So we work with the open community. We also work with the international community. And then we take great care to transition those products to the intelligence community in ways that will have impact for them.
No, that's amazing, and particularly, thank you for that overview, and particularly as you talk about the level of transparency and the efforts to really show the world the type of work that you're doing as you support the IC. Can you tell us a little bit then about, as a new director, as you mentioned, our fairly new director, telling us a little bit more about your vision and goals for the next 3 to 5 years? What initiatives do you plan to bring about? How you're going to be working with industry?
Well, so we're still developing that vision, and I was lucky enough to inherit a portfolio that was already extremely well aligned with the intelligence, with current intelligence community needs. We've got great programs going on in quantum computing, in artificial intelligence, in biometrics, in cybersecurity, in next generation communications. So this was not a situation where I nor anyone in the intelligence community thought a pivot was needed anytime soon. But we're now working on kind of understanding where that portfolio needs to go in the future, and that's a multi-part conversation. The first part of this is IARPA doesn't do anything without passionate, technically sophisticated program managers. So we want to listen to what our program managers are most passionate about, understand what signals they see, and from those things start to figure out where we might want to hire the next generation of our program managers. The other part of that conversation is of course the intelligence community. We need to know what their needs are. So normally at the end of an IARPA program, we have this word that I'm probably going to overuse, and I want to explain it at the start, called transitioning. And what that means is that we signed some memorandum of understanding with the intelligence community that they're going to take over, steward the IARPA project after IARPA is finished with it, and further develop it to the point that it can address operational needs for that agency. And there's a big gap there that often has to be crossed, going from when research and development ends and when something is then useful for either a commercial or an operational application. And sometimes that's called the valley of death. And understanding how to cross that is something that's challenging, and it may come up at other times in our conversation as well. But then the other part, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. The other part of that,
keep going.
The other part of that conversation is just understanding our research partners as well, right? Because we also don't do anything without people who propose to the programs and support the research that IARPA wants to do. And that's a community that includes academic researchers. It includes a number of really important companies. Some of them are startups, some of them are more in the defense contractor regime. And then we rely heavily on national laboratories and FFRDC, federal funded research and development corporations, to do our testing and evaluation, which is one of the other critical parts of IARPA projects, because we need to make sure that as we do this research in the open, that we can establish ground truth on what we're seeing and then understand what the implications of those breakthroughs are for the intelligence community. And so the transition, the testing and evaluation partners are a really key element of that for us.
And this is fantastic, because you really went in on the ability to identify gaps, and you talked a lot about the valley of death for technology. Can you tell us what some of these top challenges are facing the intelligence community right now, and how you go about actually identifying those specific gaps?
Yeah, so and this is, a kind of just random collection of things that occurred to me as I was, preparing for this discussion. But, we look at, so traditionally the intelligence community has had a few sources of intelligence, and they have a pretty good idea how well they can trust those sources of intelligence. Now we're entering an era with all the kind of open source intelligence sources, where we've got almost an endless collection of our sources, and we have no idea of how much we can trust any of these things. How do you treat Twitter in the intelligence community? And so that one of the challenges is just figuring out how to trust these sources, how to synthesize information across multiple sources. And we're seeing artificial intelligence tools coming up to speed at a really useful time. Of course, we don't know how well we can trust artificial intelligence either.
Hallucination with tools and everything else.
Yeah. So that's going to be a continuing challenge there. But quantum information science is now blossoming. We're seeing companies that may actually make, within the next 5 years, quantum computing platforms that are useful for. I trained as a quantum chemist growing up, where you're looking at the electronic structure of molecules and figuring out how that affects structure and catalysis and pharmaceutical activity and things like that. So it's still a ways off, but I'm optimistic that we're now starting to get platforms that can start to do something really meaningful for these important technical problems. Space is now just completely changing. 50% of the satellites in low Earth orbit are now commercial. What does that even mean from an intelligence community point of view? How do we confront the information, the competition there? How do we confront just the crowdedness of our low Earth orbit now? And then what other orbits are going to be important as we kind of move up to cislunar space? What are the other orbits that are important to the intelligence community? How do we suitably occupy those spaces? Vision is as much a culling process as it is a collecting process, and so there are always going to be just many more important, fascinating, and frankly fun topics to work on than we can ever do it. And that's why we want to make sure that we talk to our technical PMs and program managers, the people that really put all the hard work into developing an IARPA program. But then also talk to the intelligence community. We don't want to simply just get a gold star when we get a signed memorandum of understanding. We want to understand what projects historically have impacted the intelligence community. What types of things should we be doing more of? What should we be doing less of? We want to make a difference for the intelligence community. We want to give them capabilities that give them an unfair advantage in the world. And so we need to spend more time talking to. So a big part of my job is going out and talking to various elements of the intelligence community and understand now what the mission is today and what their technical needs are and what their frustrations are.
Yeah, so I want to pull on that thread a little bit, because you outlined a lot of various pieces here. You talked a lot about research development and partners in a piece of this. You've already mentioned your incredible experience in quantum computing. You've mentioned artificial intelligence. What are some of the other key R&D priorities that you folks are looking for right now? Are we talking like biotechnologies? Like what else is out there that you're hearing from your stakeholders, as you mentioned, the intelligence community, that they really would like for you to focus more on?
Yeah, so we have worked in biotechnology for a long time now. A lot of what we've done started out as biometrics, and we're kind of expanding that now into biointelligence and biosecurity.
Wait, before we go on, can you pull the thread on that a little bit? What can you tell us more about biointelligence?
So we want to understand more about the data that we collect, and then how secure the devices we use to collect that data are. You know, whether there are, you know, whether the devices that sequence our genomic data, let's say, are robust. You know, can they be spoofed? Can they be compromised? Can we trust those devices as well? Now, you know, biology. I actually did a postdoc in biological catalysis, which is, you know, which is the way, you know, enzymes work and the way that a lot of pharmaceutical activity works. And there are endless topics. You know, these, you know, again, these are more areas where there are just endless topics of interest to pursue. But beyond the kind of pharmaceutical activity and the health aspects of it, biomanufacturing is coming up as a topic that was not on my radar screen at all before I joined IARPA. You know, obviously I know that you can use, you know, cells to generate all kinds of things. I didn't realize what an issue it was for the intelligence community and for the national security community in general. And one of the connections is that, you know, very often you can use biomanufacturing techniques to evade supply chain limitations that we use for enforcing sanctions. So if you can biomanufacture something that, you know, we think, you know, it just provides a kind of end run around some of the supply chain limitations that we've done to kind of prevent other actors from developing different capabilities. And from the intelligence point of view, biomanufacturing leaves a lot of clues in it as to how, where, and I guess why it was manufactured. So we want to be able to kind of understand from some kind of a sample what we can learn about those capabilities.
So, and a part of, I would imagine, you tell me if I'm wrong, partnerships with industry, for instance, having the tools and technology, working with them hand in hand to build those types of things that can do exactly that. That can help you find the when, the how, and the why behind these questions.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that Michael Patterson, who's our wonderful program manager, who is developing a lot of these ideas, has put into his vision. It isn't enough simply to then analyze that. We need to develop analytical tools that are going to give us the full breadth of information we need in as easy to use, right? You know, if you need to walk around a laboratory or a building for a week to run it through all of its tests, it's probably not going to be a useful tool for us to kind of understand, you know, provenance of these materials. And so I think it's a testament to the way that our program managers develop programs, that they kind of look for other things that need to be developed to make those tools useful for our ultimate customers in the IC.
Well, and this leads directly into the next question, the ways to set up. Like, so how do you at IARPA balance the need for the advanced data analytics that you kind of mentioned and the intelligence capabilities, kind of with the imperative that we're seeing across the board in national security right now, the protection and privacy of sensitive information? Like we're seeing more and more questions about these types of technologies and how they're being leveraged vis-a-vis individual privacy, civil rights, civil liberties. How are you folks going about balancing that?
You know, that's a huge issue, and I certainly don't want to claim that we know the answer or even an answer at this point. But this is something that we're very much interested in. AI in particular offers a lot of risks to leak privacy data or to be compromised in other ways. And so we've got a program called Trojans in Artificial Intelligence, TrojAI, that then looks at how various AI systems, and this started years back, so it's it's even beyond the kind of current large language models, although it now includes those, of course. But how can those models be compromised and backdoored? How do they leak information? And we've got a new program starting called Bengal that's looking at bias and other limitations of artificial intelligence systems that are mostly large language model based. So we want to understand how secure information is that goes into those models, whether they can be compromised. There are new. In fact, I was at an INSA event, and I was talking to people. I'll keep them anonymous just in case there was any sensitivity around it, but sure. who were developing database tools. And one of the things I learned at this INSA event is how special these RAG tools, these retrieval augmented generation tools, are in the AI community. Because for them, it means that they don't have to have that information in the large language model itself. They can train a large language model for the general capabilities of analysis, but then they can say, go off and read this document that has maybe the kind of privacy related information, and then use that to give us an answer, so that the data doesn't have to live in that large language model. And that was something that, the best ideas are always obvious when somebody explains them to you. And that was one of those things that was like, oh, of course that's what you want to do. But it had never occurred to me until I had that conversation. So a plug to INSA events as well, because that was a really nice kind of aha moment for me.
Yeah, folks, you heard it here. Please come to more of our events where we have cutting edge type of technology all over the place. So you'll really learn something new every time. So thank you for that, Director. So and this kind of leads into other discussions about a lot of just the whiz bang stuff that you folks have going on. So we understand that you're deeply involved in the energy field through projects like one called Resilience, is focusing on developing sustainable power in extreme weather conditions, extreme cold, extreme heat. You mentioned the space domain earlier. You folks have a new system that identifies and tracks space debris. I believe Sintra is the name of it. How are these fields connected with the work for your stakeholders in the IC? And how can these advances, particularly in these types of fields, go on to help support the needs of IC operations?
Yeah, so let's talk about power sources first. One of the things that we recognize through other programs that we had developed is that the intelligence community has let me just back up a little bit. Very often what the IARPA mission looks like is understanding in all of what's now very well-funded areas, what questions does the intelligence community have that are not being met by the broader market? And how can IARPA direct its relatively smaller amount of funding, compared to what the market invests, in addressing those specific needs? So if all of these topics like quantum and AI and batteries and low Earth orbit, are all examples of this where we're trying to identify a very specific topic. And I'll call out our friends at InQtel, and it was really talking to them who have a kind of parallel problem in the capital investment field, that it kind of crystallized. No, that's the real job we have there. So again, conversations always kind of help us understand what the mission really needs to be. Okay, but getting back to our power sources, there are needs that we have for batteries, let's say, in the intelligence community that often aren't reflected by the broader battery market. Often we put devices in places that we can't check on regularly. So we need batteries that have very, very long shelf lives and don't have great leakage pathways. Often for things like UAVs, we want to be able to generate huge amounts of power to do a fast liftoff, let's say. And so resilience was targeted at some of those specific battery needs that were that we didn't see being met. So we developed new technologies that had longer lifetimes, that had greater power densities. In some cases, we improved those by a factor of 50 to then transition, specific battery devices and chemistry, and I mean, ultimately, we're often transitioning knowledge to our IC partners, and again, they need to do they often prefer to do the last mile of that development themselves. As long as we're talking about batteries, I'll also call out
go for it.
the Smarty Pants project that is looking at smart textiles, and one of the aspects of that is an understanding how you power things that go into smart textiles. And those have been developed, things like flexible batteries that aren't just these hard pucks that you have to put into a device, but can be wearable all day. So you can monitor somebody's health without having this giant battery pack sticking out of their arm.
Or like wearable solar panels, I imagine, something like that as well.
Yeah, although that is not one that we've done yet, but yeah, that's a natural. I always wanted, back in my former life doing research, I always wanted like solar house paint, right? Something that because that's the way nature does solar energy, right? Everything's green, right? And so we need it. If we're really going to harvest energy, we need it to be common enough that we're just putting it on the walls and putting it on the roof tiles, and people are developing that now. So, but.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please finish. Please continue.
Oh, so I was going to touch on Sintra because that's a really particular aspect that I think is fascinating. I mean, again, space is just this huge emerging area of interest for the intelligence community. Low Earth orbit has just changed dramatically. I mean, again, half the satellites in low Earth orbit are now commercial. It's also much more crowded, and there are things in low Earth orbit called Kessler cascades, and the idea is that if there is a collision with debris in low Earth orbit, that of course creates more debris, and that creates more collisions. And if there's a high enough density of satellites in low Earth orbit, that can kind of take out a large part of what we have in low Earth orbit. So what Sintra does specifically is it identifies a size of space debris. I think it's a millimeter to 10 centimeters, or I think it's 0.1 millimeters to 10 centimeters. That is too small to track using current devices, but large enough that it can take out a satellite. And the idea is just to kind of expand our tracking capability downwards, so that the things that can actually start one of those cascades are better known. And it does it by kind of tracking the kind of bow wave that objects in low Earth orbit make in that plasma environment there. And we're seeing results that you can actually identify and track those devices based on some of those characteristics.
Fantastic. So, and this kind of leads with these discussion of these programs and a lot of the innovative solutions you folks are creating, leads to our last question before we go into some of our audience questions. We have tons of them. Thank you, folks. If you have more, please send them in. But how can the private sector then support the IC innovation and research needs through manufacturing and technological development? You mentioned, I think, a great one in terms of the textiles, creating smart textiles and the types of materials that are going to go into that. What other things out there exist? The battery is another great example that you folks would really love to see industry help out on.
Well, manufacturing itself is revolutionizing itself. And advanced manufacturing, I think I'm not an expert in that area, but what we're seeing out of additive manufacturing, we're just seeing an increasingly huge portion of the manufacturing supply chains that can be custom made now, to things like metal parts now, and so I think I don't, that is not an area that that we put a lot of thought into currently. And I think that's one that that we need to kind of educate ourselves on and kind of understand how that impacts supply chains, how that impacts agility and kind of what we can do moving into the future in different ways. So,
like prefabrication of parts, that type of thing, understanding how it fits back into the overall national security supply chain.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to go to some rounds here with our last 10 minutes or so. We've got a lot of great audience questions, so just bear with me, folks, as I read through some of these. So from Zingle Labs, Mr. Clay Hicks asks, within the realm of the OSINT PAI publicly available information, what capability is currently unavailable that you see as being critical now or in the near future?
So, so my dream in this space is to be able to have systems that don't just answer specific questions for me. We for some time now we have systems that can answer the questions that we ask. What's the temperature in this place? What I want to know is based on this huge amount of data, what questions do I need to be asking about that, right? And that's a much harder, and that comes to kind of synthesizing knowledge, and that probably means synthesizing knowledge across different data streams. And the example, I'm probably your audience has heard this multiple times, but when U.S. Special Forces went in after bin Laden, someone had tweeted, there are helicopters in the sky at 2 a.m. in Abbottabad. This doesn't happen very often. So there was that signal out there where, Twitter knew about that raid before many of us did. And so an example is, what kind of tools do we need that might look across something like a Twitter space and say, no, this is really something that we need to pay attention to. And that's a really hard question, right? So, that's then kind of synthesizing the knowledge rather than just analyzing the knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you have companies out there like Jane's, like Data Miner, that are looking for opportunities to build out those types of tools and do exactly that. So that's a absolutely great one. So next, we're going to go to a question from Georgetown University from the School of Foreign Service. And this question is, what skills should students and aspiring IC officers bring to the table at the intersection of emerging technology and security?
General skills first. Being able to communicate well and clearly is just the most. Hopefully, I've been able to do that here, but
I think you've done a great job. You've done a great job.
But it is really important to be able to talk about complicated technical topics to people that don't have technical backgrounds and explain to them why they need to care about those and what the potential impact is. One of the things that DARPA gave us is the Heilmar Catechism, which is this set of questions that ARPA type programs use to help understand whether a program is suitable for ARPA type funding. So these are, what are you trying to do? And one of the most important elements of that is, express that using absolutely no jargon. How is it done today? What are the limitations of today's things? And so, but beyond just the Heilmar Catechism, just communicating generally is important. Passion's really important. We need people to get excited about these technologies and not just say this would be a great thing to do, but kind of shake us and say, no, you're missing it. This is really, really important. We need to act on this. So passion around technology or around intelligence community needs, and then understanding both of those, right? Understanding the kind of technical side well, but then also understanding what the operation space looks like for the intelligence community. What does it need? What are the limitations? what would change the game for them? So some subset of those things is just critical, and we're lucky to have people with a good collection of those capabilities, but we can always use more people in those areas.
Fantastic. So here's a question a little bit about some of our Five Eyes partners type work. And to the extent that you may be able to engage on this, what lessons are being learned and implemented from any of your work on AUKUS, on both pillars of the AUKUS agreement?
So, I'm relatively new in this job, so I'm starting to wrap my head around what AUKUS, although this month I've traveled to both Australia and the UK. So, those have been good places to have that. I think what has been valuable for me is talking to counterparts in other nations. Very often the kind of counterpart organizations have to have the same scope as the kind of as many different organizations. So let's say an IARPA counterpart in another country might have the scope of an IARPA plus a DARPA combined.
Yeah.
So they have an even broader scope, but then they're also, just because of the size of those organizations, much closer to the operations themselves. And that's a really useful range, to have to understand the kind of end-to-end of those technical discussions, but then to also be a little bit closer to the operation, so that they understand what those operational needs are. And so those have been the types of discussions that have been most useful to me. Now that's a fairly generic answer in terms of AUKUS itself, but to date, those have been the things that have been the really valuable conversations, just because they also then understand, the kind of technical breadth, but then, let us know, where we need additional solutions, how engineering can help in these areas, how kind of different technical readiness levels can address different parts of that solution.
Well, I mean, and as we see, so many of the challenges are becoming more geopolitical, more global. That communication can't be understated. Just understanding what our partners are doing, how their operations work, how their procedures work. I think that's incredibly thoughtful approach on it. So thank you for those thoughts. So another one from NGA, from government official. What IARPA projects for assured positioning, navigation, and timing capabilities, given that GPS, GNSS systems are so vulnerable? So what are some of the projects out there right now for that, and the capabilities in terms of protecting them?
Gosh, I don't know of a current P&T system we have, but that is something that we're really interested in starting. There is great work being done in both magnetic navigation capabilities and in quantum sensing capabilities in both of those areas, and that's something that IARPA is very much interested in exploring.
Just to follow up on that, can you tell us a little bit about the quantum sensing piece of that?
Yeah, so a lot of times what one does is you can take collections of neutral atoms typically, and you put them in a quantum superposition and kind of make an interferometer out of it. It's called light pulsed atom interferometry. They often call it atomic atom interferometry, and that's confusing because they call it AI. But so those interferometers are very sensitive to any kind of acceleration or a motion. So you can use those to do things like determine, whether you're moving or accelerating someplace. And just by integrating Newton's equations, you can then figure out what your position is just from the inertia of those devices. And those are now reaching maturity now. And that's part of the challenge, in that there are really good companies out there today that are now developing inertial navigation solutions or magnetic navigation solutions. And one of the challenges, every time I have an idea, I say, oh, let's do something like this. And I do a little bit of research into it, and I realize, oh, there's this great community that is this great company or set of companies that's already addressing those areas. So it brings up another aspect of the IARPA challenge, which is that it takes us about a year to develop an idea and 3 years for whatever we do to bear fruit. So we need to think a little bit ahead of where current technology is. And what I'm very interested in this area that NGA brought up is what's a challenge that's far enough ahead of where industry is today that it's going to pull industry in the direction that NGA needs it to go, right? Because that's what the topic of an IARPA program is going to be, right? If there's a company doing that today, great, we should just buy their stuff, right? We need to think far enough ahead. And this is like AI. This is like a lot of fields. It's moving very, very quickly, and people are doing great work in industry already. So there's this challenge of just getting enough ahead of it to figure out, what's something that's going to inspire the community. It's going to sound like it's impossible today.
And I think we all absolutely agree on the idea that there's so much movement, particularly from small businesses when it comes to this level of technology. You talk about AI. So a big question that we just received, like, what is the best way for a small software developer or AI company to get involved with working directly with IARPA? Like, what are some of the vehicles out there? How are you bringing those folks into the fold?
So all of our calls are advertised on sam.gov. But we also have Twitter feeds and LinkedIn feeds that we use to advertise the programs when they're announced and when they're making progress. So you can follow us on those outlets. And then, I spend a lot of my time talking to people at conferences and workshops on what they need. And my question's always the same. It's, and it gets on what we just talked about. It's, what does the IARPA program look like in this area, given that it has to be far enough ahead, it has to sound like it's ARPA hard, right? It has to sound like it's really, really impossible to do. What does that look like in all of these areas? And as small companies have ideas of that, we're not looking for a solution that they have today. If they have the solution today, that's great. We're looking for then something that's going to drive them and competitors towards creating new capabilities for the intelligence community.
Yeah. So, and this is fantastic. We've got about 3 minutes left. I want to use maybe 2 more questions, 30-second hits. A quick one. Can you quickly, just at a very high level, talk about IARPA's technology protection team and what they're doing to ensure the security of projects?
Wow, was that planted by our technology protection team? We have an amazing, we call it research technology and protection team. In fact, I'm meeting with them later on today. They do a huge amount of work in just understanding how we want to classify information, how we want to protect it, what kind of levels of investigations are needed on that. And this is something that I'm sure all your listeners are aware is being really contended with on a national level. So the National Science Foundation also has very good research technology. As these new technologies start to impact national security and economic security, we want to make sure that we're protecting that. And we've got a very good team that does the research into how sensitive these technologies are and what kind of protections we need to put on them.
One last question. I thought this one was very interesting from Arkfield. As we approach the peak of the 11-year solar cycle, how much will you take account of space weather in your systems and in your planning?
Yeah, great question. The really short answer is I don't know. So I just learned from dealing with programs like Sintra how much that space environment changes. So I think that'd be a great program for a great question for Alexis Truitt, who is the Sintra program manager and is wonderful in every way. To attempt to answer, but I'm just learning about some of the nuances of space weather myself, and and how much that plasma environment changes,
Yeah.
not only in the 11-year cycles, but also just day to day, just how much that cycle changes and how that impacts how successful satellite launches are, for example.
It's amazing. Dr. Muller, Director, thank you so much for joining us. Any closing thoughts really quickly as we close out?
No, thanks. This has been fun for me. I hope it's been informative. I feel like I punted on a couple questions, but hopefully the audience found it helpful. And I really try to be accessible so that people can understand what IARPA does. So if you see me at conferences, please introduce yourselves. Talk to me about what you're excited about. Talk to me about where the intelligence community needs to go and how we can get there.
Well, thank you again so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Amazing conversation. And again, a big thank you to Freedom Technology Solutions Group for their sponsoring of this program, and to all of you for joining us online and listening. Thank you so much for tuning in. When the webinar ends, you'll have a short survey. Please make sure you take a few moments to complete it. It really helps us know how we did and how we can improve for next time. Looking ahead, we will hold a coffee and conversation with DIA CIO Doug Casa on Tuesday, October 8th, with my boss, one of my bosses, John Doyen, our EVP. He will preview the upcoming DOTUS conference as well as discuss his top cyber priorities. And on Tuesday, October 15th, we'll have Doug Carlos Bescam and Dr. Catherine Camaletti from NCSC's Enterprise Threat Mitigation Directorate. We will be discussing insider threat and the new national counterintelligence strategy. And then we return in-person programs with our Developing AI at the Edge, Building a Resilient Architecture. It is a TSSCI keynote and panel. Our keynote will be NSA CISO Mark Sullivan, and panelists will include the CIO from NGA, the Technology and Data Services Director for INA DHS, Intelligence and Analysis, and it will be moderated by Dr. John Muller. Dr. Muller is the former AI officer for the IC and the current executive director of ARLIS. And finally, we will hold a leadership dinner honoring and hosting the new DIA director, General Cruz, on Thursday, November 14th at the Hilton McLean Tyson's Corner. You can learn about these and many of our other programs, all of our other programs on INSAonline.org. This concludes our programming. Thank you again so much for joining us, and have a wonderful day.